And there he is, Russ,
Here we
Russ
are.
Colvin.
Good
Good to see
morning,
you.
good
How?
afternoon, wherever you are.
Yeah, good. It's good morning here in Texas, but on the East Coast, it's good afternoon.
Yeah,
So good to see you here again, Russ. And
thank you.
uh, you've been
Likewise.
very successful operator in the self-storage space for a number of years, and you have a handful of QOZ offerings, self-storage offerings that are within opportunity zones. And today we're going to hear about one of your latest projects, the Owens project in Las
Yes,
Vegas, Nevada.
yes.
So
Okay.
without further ado, I'm going to share your slide deck. I think you should be able to see
Yes,
it
very
now.
good. That's the
And the
first.
floor is yours, Russ, for the next 30 minutes.
Thank you. Well, good morning again. This is Russ Colvin. I'm CEO and president of YourSpace America. We develop self-storage projects nationwide. And just a minute or two on myself. I have spent my entire adult life in commercial real estate, about 20 years on the lending side and about 20 years on the investment side. The last 13 years on self-storage. I was CEO of North American Self-Storage for 5 years. We had a number of very successful projects, but we created YourSpace America in 2021 because I felt like I wanted to hold projects longer and maximize the returns even further. So, I mean, opportunity zone projects are really ideal for that. But the goal being to maximize returns for our investors, and we could do a whole nother presentation on that. So as Jimmy was saying, this first project is the Owens property in Las Vegas. We'll provide a complete overview of the project and why we see it as one of the most compelling opportunity zone investments available. We'll briefly discuss another project we recently completed in Las Vegas, and also provide an overview of the self-storage industry, and then finally a few moments about our company, and then we'll answer any questions that you have. Next slide. Okay, that's a disclaimer, obviously. Let's see, next slide. I'm often asked, what we look for in selecting self-storage development sites. And there are a few constants, and as we go through the presentation here, you'll see why. But number one is we want an undersupplied market. We don't want to be in a market where there's excess self-storage, unless, of course, it's all old projects in the market and we're bringing, a qualitative improvement to the market. We want a market with positive demographics. Las Vegas certainly checks that box. In terms of growth, in this property, there are 542,000 people in a 5-mile radius. So I'd say that's pretty solid demographics. We also want markets that have strong prospects for continued growth. We want a good location. And as I'll be showing you, this project is less than 200 feet from Interstate 15. And so when it's completed, I tell people it'll probably be the most recognizable self-storage facility in Las Vegas. This building is about 158,844 square feet with about 116,300 net rentable square feet and about 1,163 units approximately. It will be a Class A, fully climate controlled facility with state-of-the-art security. Most of the competition in this market are older B and C projects, mostly non-climate. Average project is about 30 years old. This will definitely be the nicest self-storage facility in the market when it's completed. In fact, when we got the project approved, we promised the Las Vegas City Council that it was going to be the nicest self-storage facility in the market. Anyway, next slide. Let's see, next slide. This slide is another rendering of the property. I think when you look at this, it almost doesn't really look like self-storage. It looks like it could be multifamily or retail, but I think it's a very attractive design. Okay, next slide. This is an overview of total project cost, project size, rents, stabilized NOI. We're raising about 8.15 million here. We're planning to get a loan in place of about 15 million. This project is fully approved, building permits in hand, construction is beginning next week. We expect construction to take about 1 year. And then, although our pro forma say 2.5 years for stabilization, we think it could actually be done sooner than that, given the location and the demand and all of those things. Anyway, next slide. Again, 1,163 units. We have building permit. Groundbreaking is next week. Sponsor is YourSpace America. And as I say, my track record is that every project, self-storage project I've ever been involved in, has been successful. And of all the projects that I've worked on over the years, this current group of projects, I would have to say, is among the most, probably the most compelling of anything that I've done. Next slide. This next slide again has some information about the project. We're projecting an IRR of 24.77 with a 5.78 multiple. I mentioned we're raising about 8.15 million and about a loan of about 15 million. Next slide. All due diligence, as I mentioned, is completed. All permits are in place. You know, we have clean environmental, and there's limited new supply within the market. Anyway, next slide. This slide is an aerial view of the property. You see with the little red dot here and where it's located in the market. And I'm going to show you another one in a moment, another aerial type of view, but you can see the red dot, and right there is Interstate 15. So gives you an idea of the size and so forth. But again, very strong population. Next slide. This next slide is an overview of the supply in the market. And we look at, in analyzing supply, we look at the 1 mile radius, 2 mile radius, 3 mile radius, and the 5 mile radius. But in this case, you know, there's limited supply, and there's only one facility currently in the 1 mile radius and 3 in the 2 mile radius, so significantly undersupplied. So you've got, you know, 78,000 people in a 2 mile radius, so you're several 100,000 square feet of self-storage space undersupplied. And again, the 3 mile radius is undersupplied as well. And what does that mean? That means that when we go to lease up the building, that it should be extremely well received, not just because there's limited supply, but also because it'll be the nicest facility in the market. Anyway, next slide. This slide basically shows you where the new competition, the green dots, basically show you where the new projects are going to be. And I'm hearing that one of these projects may actually not happen. It may not be able to get approval from the city of Las Vegas. So there may be even less supply than we expect, but both located in a considerable distance from our property. Next slide. This again gives you an aerial view of the property, 2 different perspectives, shows you the interstate and all of the downtown and so forth, North Las Vegas, West Las Vegas, etc. Next slide. This next slide is a pretty graphic overview. You see the red dot, and that's our site. So as I mentioned, you've got Interstate 15 with 175,000 vehicles per day. And then you have Owens Avenue with nearly 15,000 vehicles per day. So needless to say, it's going to be seen by a lot of people. Anyway, next slide. This next slide is a site plan of the property and shows you the property layout on the site. So essentially, when you enter in the front, it'll be very easy to drive around, to load, to unload, to park, and to drive back out there easily. There will be a gate about halfway back. You can see it right there, for security. It'll be a security code access, so you have to have the code to get into the building, and a code to open the gate. And again, the facility will be fully climate controlled. It'll have a state-of-the-art security system. Anyway, it's going to be a beautiful facility. Next slide. These next few slides are interesting. So in order to get approval for this sign, okay, this sign is 80 feet high and the site's about 30 feet above the interstate. So the top of this sign is about 110 feet above the interstate, okay? So one of the requirements was to do a simulation of where the sign would be located if you're driving down the freeway and what it would look like. Now this sign, the actual sign we got approved is for a fully electronic sign. And this sign you're seeing here is just has public storage on it, is going to be our manager. But one of the more interesting things and the most compelling reason for the signage beyond advertising the property is, yes, you can have signage up there to advertise the property, but then you can also intermittently have signage up there to advertise other things, and you can charge people rent for that space because the sign itself is going to be 360 square feet, quite large. And people will pay a pretty hefty price to be able to advertise. We're assuming that it will generate about $200,000 a year in revenue, which should translate into, $4 to $5 million additional proceeds when we go to sell it. So it took about a year to get the sign approved. It had final approval last week from the City of Las Vegas City Council, but it was worth spending the year getting the sign approved. So as I say, you can see the sign pretty clearly if you're going down the interstate. So here's the next view, the next simulation. Again, if you're driving, you can see, you will not be able to miss it. And imagine that being lighted. So also imagine it at night being fully illuminated, highly visible. Let's see, next slide again. This is a view from a little different angle going down the interstate from the other side, still highly visible. And again, imagine what it would look like at night. Let's see, next slide. Another view of the signage from further away. But I guess the point in looking at all these simulations is showing you how highly visible it's going to be. And when I've told people it's going to be the most visible self-storage facility in Las Vegas, I was serious. Next slide. And this is the last slide, but these simulations give you a very good idea, I think, of what we're talking about on the signage and give our property an advantage in the market. Will also create some very good revenue for our investors. Next slide. So this next slide is something that I talk about all the time. And I like to say we run a tight ship, and you have to on the development side. We're very picky about who we use as a contractor. We currently use probably the top contractor in the United States for self-storage, which is Arco Murray. Been working with them for about 7 years. Every project we've done with them has been successful. We never had any significant delays or cost overruns. And I also often tell them that they're not a contractor. I tell them they're a partner because they think like a partner, they act like a partner, they care about the projects. And that's the kind of contractor you want. They're also the third largest design build firm in the United States, do about $4 billion a year. We also make it a point to have some excess liability insurance on the property. So if there's ever an issue, everybody's fully protected. Site security, We have security on the site. Even now, it's a vacant parcel. We have cameras on site watching the site. So if anybody comes on, the system tells them to leave. If they don't leave in a couple minutes, it calls the police. And when it's under construction, it'll be the same thing. Online project monitoring, and a lot of people told us they like this. So when the project is under construction, you will have access to the camera system at the site, which we put on every project, and you can literally log in, go on and see what's happening at the site. And a lot of people like that. I personally like it very much. I use it quite a bit. We have weekly management calls with the contractor in terms of construction management. We're very tough on site security. We update the schedule on the projects every month because we want things being done on time. But the message here is, we want everything done properly. And as I say, we run a tight ship. Next slide. So I mentioned Arco Murray, the contractor. They also, I believe, have an edge on pricing because of the scale of which that they buy construction materials for all of their properties, whether it's steel or whatever. But we have also, on our own, gone out to steel suppliers. And for example, Janus, the company that supplies about 85% of all the doors and partitions in the self-storage industry. We have additional competitive pricing from them. So we like to think we save our investors even a little more money there. But we watch everything. So we want a very high quality project, but we don't want to pay any more than necessary. You may have noticed the signage on this property says public storage, and we'll talk a little more about them later in the presentation. But I've used all of the public REITs for management, and I really think that the REITs have the best management platform. In the case of public storage, they are the largest owner of self-storage in the world. They own over 3,000 properties, and they have an excellent management platform, and they don't differentiate whether it's property is managed or owned. They treat them all the same. They have excellent reporting. They're very good at lease up. They have some advantages. About 80% of our customers come from online, and they have some advantages online in terms of search engine optimization and driving clients to the site. So I think we're in good hands there, in the best possible hands, really, with Public Storage and the best contractor in the United States. And I like to think maybe the best sponsor as well. Okay, next slide. This next slide is a project that was completed about 5 months ago with some other investors. And this started right before we created YourSpace America, but this project was completed on time, on budget. Arco Murray was the contractor. It's been open, as I say, a little less than 5 months, and it's pushing 50% occupancy. So it's doing extremely well. A beautiful project. This North Rancho location, this is a state highway. Certainly the nicest self-storage facility in that market. Very good growing market, with a lot of traffic along the state highway. But it just gives you an idea of some of the projects that we do. Next slide. The self-storage industry. Self-storage has really become what most people consider the safest and strongest performing commercial real estate type. In these coming slides, I'll show you why I believe self-storage has become a preferred asset class and why it attracts literally some of the largest investors in the world invest in this product type. And I'll cover more of that as we go on here. But I think you'll find some of it quite compelling. Next slide. The other thing is that self-storage has become an international asset class. It's popular now in Canada. It's popular in the United Kingdom, popular in Australia. There's even some going on in China, France, the Netherlands. So it's not just an American product anymore. Anyway, next slide. This is interesting, and it's something I talk about quite a bit. So the National Association of Real Estate Investment Trusts monitors the performance of REITs in various product types. And every year they do an analysis of what the total returns were for each product type. And self-storage, next slide, self-storage over the last 30 years, from 1994 to 2023, has outperformed every other asset class in the NAREIT index, which includes office, industrial, retail, multifamily, healthcare, lodging, mortgage REIT, timber, infrastructure, all those things. Next slide. This next slide is kind of a graphic display of that average performance over the last 30 years. You have industrial here at the left, office, retail, residential, and so forth. And the green spot here is self-storage, so outperforming all of them over a 30-year period. Pretty impressive. Next slide. These next few slides, I like to talk about the self-storage industry and how it's grown and how people invest not just in self-storage, but in the self-storage REITs as well. And this is an example of the growth in Public Storage's stock price from going from 2001 to 2024. It's pretty compelling. And actually, since this graph was created, their market cap now is close to 59 billion instead of 50. Next slide. This next slide is Extra Space, which shows their growth over the last 20 years. You can see on the left and on the right, it's pretty impressive. And their market cap, since this was prepared, we're going to have to update this because their market cap's now about 38 billion. Next slide. CubeSmart, same thing. You can see the growth from CubeSmart from 2004 to 2024. There's a reason why people want to buy these REITs is because they perform. The reason that they perform is that the underlying product performs, the self-storage, which makes it easy to pay investors a dividend if you have performing assets. And again, CubeSmart's market cap is over 11 billion now. And finally, NSA, they're newer. They came out in 2015, but still, yes, phenomenal growth in their stock as well. And again, they're over 5 billion now. But it shows you, again, the performance and why people invest in self-storage. Next slide. This is an interesting slide. The other thing about self-storage is that it performs well in challenging environments. And during the pandemic, this graph here shows how it performed against all the other asset classes. So everybody remembers the pandemic, no doubt. A lot of concern there, a lot of concern also about people's investments, jobs, everything. But if you were invested in self-storage, you were in good shape. Next slide. This comes back to something I had said earlier, looking at the kind of investors that invest in self-storage. Now, investing in our projects essentially allows individual investors to achieve the same kind of returns that these largest investors in the world achieve through their self-storage investments. In fact, even better because it's development and our returns are even higher. But this is an interesting slide here in that these 10 companies own about half of the stock, Public Storage. And you look at the list of companies here and you see some of these are the largest investors in the world. Vanguard, BlackRock. What is BlackRock? Manages over 4 trillion, I believe. Household name investors, JP Morgan, Charles Schwab. Anyway, it just shows you the caliber of investors that believe in self-storage. Next slide. This is another one as well. This is Extra Space, the second largest REIT, but many of the same investors. So here you have Vanguard has almost a $5 billion stock holding in Extra Space, and you've got BlackRock, all these major, JP Morgan again, all of these major investors have huge positions in self-storage, and there's a reason for it. Next slide. This is another compelling aspect about self-storage investments, pointing to its safety, is CMBS data, commercial mortgage-backed securities, and how they perform. Next slide. This was a slide that we prepared that kind of ran through before and after the Great Recession. And you look down here at the bottom, you see the average delinquency rates for these various product types, okay, ranging, from multifamily to healthcare. And here is self-storage at 1.62%. So even during the Great Recession, when some of these product types had double-digit delinquency rate, self-storage was still low. Next slide. This is actually one of my favorite slides. This basically is the pandemic period, so January of 2020 to May of 2022, before, during, and after the pandemic. So the blue line is overall commercial mortgage-backed securities and how various types of properties performed inclusively. And at the bottom, you see the green part, and you see self-storage had, again, the lowest delinquency rate of anything. It's almost no delinquency. In fact, I was reading a report recently by Fitch, which is one of the rating agencies, and they were talking about, they put out a press release on delinquency rates for various property types, and they had multifamily, industrial were a little less than 1%, and they had office and retail delinquencies. And then at the bottom, they had self-storage. The delinquency rate for self-storage in their report was 0. Next slide. And now I'd like to talk a little about YourSpace and our philosophy. As I mentioned, we created YourSpace because I wanted to hold projects longer and maximize returns to investors. So in spite of the fact that on all of the projects I've been involved in over the years, investors did extremely well, I thought they could have done even better. And I take pride in achieving good returns. So that's really our goal. And if you look at some of the returns on these projects, not just our opportunity zone projects, but other projects as well, they're all extremely compelling. When you think about self-storage and think it's a safe product to invest in, the safest, but also has among the highest returns. Next slide. Our management team, we have a great management team, very diverse team, very hardworking group. We all share one thing in common, though, and that is our concern for our investors, our concern for building quality product and long-term value for our investors, because I tell people all the time that ultimately the greatest thing that people invest with you isn't money, it's trust. So when somebody invests with you, they're telling you that they trust you and you need to perform for them. Next slide. Management team. Next slide. Shows you basically our team. We also have an advisory board, and a couple of people in our advisory board are Brad Daniger, who is the CEO and co-chairman of Arco Murray, and Jeff Agashi from Janus, which is a company that supplies about 85% of all the doors and partitions in self-storage. But again, we have a great team, a great board. We're very fortunate. Next slide. And so that concludes our presentation, and I'm available for questions. If anybody has any questions right now, or if somebody wants to call me after or email me, I'm very responsive. So if you contact me, you'll hear back from me quickly.
Well, thank you, Russ. We great presentation, and thank you again for being a partner at OZ Pitch Day. We love and appreciate your continued support of OpportunityZones.com and OZ Pitch Day and everything we're doing over here. We do have a few questions that I wanted to address here in the main session, and then in about another minute or two, Russ is going to move into his breakout session. I'm going to
Okay,
post the link for that breakout session right now, but Russ, sit tight here because I did want to get to one or two of these questions here.
sure.
John asks, who will be managing the property? Is this in-house management by YourSpace America, or are you contracting it out to
Um,
a vendor?
as I mentioned during the presentation, we're going to be using Public Storage on this property, which is the largest owner and manager of self-storage in the world, traded on the New York Stock Exchange. I talked about them, which I think for this market, they're the best possible manager. They have a major presence in the Las Vegas market. They're very good managers, but no matter who you have managing your property, we could do a whole nother 1 hour session on this subject. No
We
matter who
definitely
you
could.
have managing the property, they need to be managed. Okay. So we provide the asset management, we oversee them, and we have regular meetings with them to make sure, everything is being dealt with, whether it's rental rates or whether it's, we see some weeds that we don't want or something needs to be repaired or something. We watch the properties very carefully, but I think that, the best thing we can do for our investors, a lot of companies try to do their own management on self-storage, and I think they leave something to be desired. And I think the best thing we can do for our investors is have the best managers on the planet managing them.
Very good. We'll get to one more question here, and then if you have other questions for Russ, please do join him in his breakout session. And then here in the main session, we're going to be talking about how we think a Trump presidency may reshape opportunity zones and renew and extend opportunity zones at some point next year. If you're not sure which one to attend, go to Russ's because we're going to record the one here and I'm going to make it into a podcast and it'll be available in the next day or two. So, last question for you, Russ, before your breakout session is how do you assess future demand for self storage based on location and demographics, aside from current undersupply? Any other factors that you like to consider?
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't want to say, "Oh, we're building here because it's an undersupplied market," but there's 9 other projects being developed. So we also look at if there's any other projects being developed. We also look at, growth in the market. Okay, if there's, let's say, 500,000 people in the 5 mile, which is pretty strong. Okay, what's been the growth for the last few years? What's the projected growth? Okay, and we want to be in markets where the projected growth is solid. We never want to be in a market where somebody's saying, "Oh, the population has dropped 5% over the last 5 years," or anything like. Even though it's a good population, we want to be in a market where there's a growing population, where there isn't a lot of self storage under development. We also like being a qualitative improvement to the market, meaning that if you go into a market where the existing supply is not real high quality and older, that our project will lead the market in terms of quality. And about 2/3 of the people that decide to use storage nowadays are women, and they want a clean facility. They want one that's has good security, all of those things. And I think we have a market advantage by having all of that.
Very good. Well, Russ, I did just post the link to the breakout session in the Zoom chat. Can you find it there? Go ahead and click that and join that breakout session. Um,
Okay.
and everybody else, Russ, thanks for joining. I'll see
Thank
you
you.
next time. Appreciate
Okay.
it. Just go ahead and click that link now, Russ, to
Okay.
get into your breakout session. And if anybody else wants to join Russ for a more intimate experience and have the ability to ask him questions directly, please do so now and
Thank
click
you
that
all very
link.
much.